I think it's a very interesting question. I mean, in a sense, there's something a little bit medieval about the patent, because back in the day, the way you could make money, it'd be granted a monopoly on something by a king, and you have the monopoly for mangles, whatever it is, granted by the king. Therefore, I'm going to make loads of money supplying mangles to this country, whatever it is. And it's potentially we're trying to do that sort of thing with the creative, the new idea, and say the way you're going to earn money from this is by having this exclusive monopoly of it. And that's not the only way to earn money from things, as you suggest. Now, the difficult thing is, it's in a sense, it's the monopoly for the limited period of time, which it absolutely should be, is the reward for having the idea. Now, the question is, what is the right level of reward to give, and what's the right design of that reward? And you're absolutely right to raise the question. Perhaps there is a better way. And if you can work it up into something, I'll have to look at it. Yeah. I mean, there's a really interesting problem, I think, with drugs, because obviously you need R&D into new drugs is hugely expensive, and there needs to be a big cash reward for a company that brings out a new drug that is effective. And but the way they do that is, of course, by sticking on the price. And so something has been invented, and if scarcity is created, artificial scarcity, and you have to pay a lot of money for each individual patient you treat. And maybe it'd be more effective to say, okay, well done, you've created a brilliant new drug, have X million pounds prize, can we please have it at kind of generic cost price, and we can treat more people and you can make more profit. But that's a brilliant theory, and it's been argued on, I've read it on the internet being argued, but there are difficulties with it. So, because maybe the drug isn't as good as you originally thought, and you've given away all that money. So, absolutely the right question to ask. We are a bit medieval, but it's going to be a massive challenge making it better.
Okay. I'm going to move on. We mentioned transparency in the lawmaking process recently. Things like the data protection regulations at the European Parliament were the subject of huge amounts of commercial lobbying, which people like myself, it was my job to go up against that. Why should we trust the European Parliament given the weight of commercial lobbying on issues like data protection?
Can I go first?
Yep.
Right, Ed, I think once again you've answered your own question. You're doing a very good job of this tonight. I'm going to make a party political point before I begin.
Oh, good.
Yeah, oh, good. The British Conservatives were the first party in the European Parliament to introduce the transparency register. Every meeting that every Conservative MEP has is registered and published. Now, I think this is the best way to go about it. I think we shouldn't stop commercial lobbying. I think private companies have the right to lobby legislators just as all of us do. I think the real argument, Ed, is for people like you, more people like you, to do a better job. And I think, frankly, the civil society process works extremely well in Brussels.
I'll give you a direct debit for us at the end.
Yeah, no, I'm quite happy to fly the flag. But when I was in Brussels, I spent 2 very happy years in the European Parliament. And I tell you what, even as a Conservative, and even as a moderate Eurosceptic, I would argue that the European Parliament is a lot more open to lobbying than Westminster is, for example. It's very clear who does what, who is able to influence, who has votes, who has power, and most MEPs will accept meetings. I think it's a wonderful way to make laws. It's why I'm standing as a European candidate.
Fantastic.
There's a bit of the mention of Westminster. Our parliamentary representative Caroline Lucas, appearing on Question Time tonight, was.
This doesn't go out.
It's not going out now, is it? But yeah, she described the Westminster Parliament as being very much like Hogwarts in many ways. Not just in the architecture, but also in the general approach of mysticism and things that are around it. And I do take the point about lobbying there and about culture and all those sort of things. And I do take the point that the European Parliament is a much more modern institution and a much more forward-thinking institution in many ways. But what it cannot do is get the balance right, if you like, between the huge power that multinational corporations have and the amount of money that they're willing to spend on lobbying in the European Parliament, and comparing that to smaller organisations which are lobbying for our rights and such like. And so how you deal with that imbalance, I think, is pretty important. And what that requires is European parliamentarians who recognise that who actually recognise the lobbyists with their huge commercial interest for what they are, and also what gives equal weight, if you like, to those who haven't got
Andrew, I
equal
want to pick
power.
you up on a point of fact there. What
Okay.
you're saying is not true.
Crikey, isn't
the
it?
two most well-funded lobbying organisations in Brussels are Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. It's not the case that big fat cats with bags of dollars are coming in and throwing them at MEPs.
But if you
the
actually
reason
look
I think
at
that we get such left-wing legislation out of the European Parliament is because civil society does such a great job.
Since I've been accused of saying things which are not true, let's have a look at some of the organisations which are incredibly successful, and we're talking about in the energy sector, in the coal sector. If you're looking at things like the shale gas industry, the huge influence they've had over the fracking, some of the fracking legislation that's gone through the European Parliament.
Voted to limit fracking.
Yes, but it's not voted to. It's not voted again for a moratorium on fracking, which certainly was up in the Parliament.
It doesn't have the competence to.
But a moratorium was up there as one of the for voting on. So
it doesn't have the ability to. It can only influence shale gas extraction, since you mentioned through health and safety legislation.
But
the competence, as we discussed in the previous Hustings over energy, is purely a member state.
There was a vote on a moratorium on fracking in the
There was a vote
European
to call
Parliament.
for one, but not to introduce one.
Well, this is exactly what we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? Because that sort of influence can have influence over other countries. I know what you're talking about.
Political posture,
Right.
Political posturing.
David Wildgoose?
I just want to make the general point that Andrew was attempting to make, which is the actual imbalance between the huge funds available to large corporations that can lobby and wine and dine at MEPs, but that ordinary citizens do not have that facility. And the problem we have, of course, then is favourable legislation specifically designed for particular corporations. Classic example, I think, actually at the EU level would be the phase out of incandescent bulbs and the replacement with far more expensive, far more expensive, supposedly more energy efficient mercury-filled bombs. And the issue there, of course, was simply the fact that the European companies couldn't compete with low-cost manufacture abroad. Now, there is an issue with energy efficiency, and I'm not disputing that. What I object to is the way that competition was basically bought by the EU and by EU companies to rig it in their favour. And there are other examples.
It's very easy, if a law gets passed that you don't like, you know, the wrong kind of light bulb or something, to say, well, that must be somebody's been lobbied to do that, and if it's something that you do like, then you know, for once the politicians have done their job right. And maybe we'll never know the truth in all of these cases. I don't think the lobbying problem is vastly different in Europe to anywhere else, to British Parliament, to national parliaments elsewhere. It's right that we have a process for you know, a register of lobbyists and so on, and other countries have gone different distances in that down that path with different degrees of success. I think Canada and Australia have tried particularly hard in that area, again with mixed results. So I think it's right we keep an eye on that. I don't think there's a solution. I don't think you said nobody can talk to MEPs, nobody can talk to MPs. That would do any good. I agree. Actually, civil society is vastly influential. 38 degrees is vastly influential. You know, 38 degrees. I'll drop a hat to say, okay, 1 million people are going to email their MPs tomorrow on this issue, and they will. And it does make a difference. And it's not, and nor is it the case that civil society is always right, always wrong, and that businesses are always right or wrong. It's as is most things in real life, really a great big muddle. And you know, there's something British about that, isn't there?
Just to provide a bit of context to that question, Andrew Cooper's Green colleague in the European Parliament, Jan-Philipp Albrecht, drove through the data protection regulations and had over 4,000 amendments proposed for that, many of which were shown later on to have come directly from large internet firms and were exactly the same wording as the proposals by those large internet firms, which felt to many of us at the time as being overflowing the European parliamentary process with commercial lobbying, which civil society wasn't able to counteract or even oppose in any way at all, because of the sheer weight and volume of amendments which were being made. So that's where I think much of the We Promise pledge on transparency came from, that we were worried about that development. So, I mean, it seems like something which you both of you here seem worried about, that sort of commercial lobbying is
Absolutely.
Sure.
is going out.
It's
really
people buying legislation in their favour, and it's completely in opposition to true democratic values. You know,
Okay. Would the audience anyone in the audience have any questions they'd like to ask on issues to do with the way that our laws get made in Brussels and whether we have any transparency over that? And no, it's fine. I'm going to say that we'll have one last question and then go on to closing statements, and then we can close up. Then, okay. Okay. So, a big issue that has dominated much of the media over the last couple of years has been anonymity online. Does online anonymity protect whistleblowers and free speech, or encourage criminality and irresponsibility on the internet?
Both.
yeah.
Okay. This is totally the question.
No, I don't think it's a divisive question at all, Ed. I think a hammer is a tool for good and evil. A hammer can build a house for the homeless or commit a murder as a blunt instrument.
Okay.
I think, I'll go back right to my initial point, the trade-off between liberty and security. Of course, anything can be used for good or for ill. There will always be this trade-off, we'll never oppose it. A comment I made earlier to David about liberty and licence. I think we have free speech in the UK. You can go to Speaker's Corner, but it is important that when you go to Speaker's Corner, you name yourself. You say, I am Michael Naughton, I am David, Joe, Andrew, and I believe X, or Y, or Z. So, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah,
Do you think we should be protecting online anonymity?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a role for online anonymity, and I think there are plenty of people who want to engage in whether it's discussion or debate or self-expression or whatever it is, who for whatever reason cannot use their true identity, whether it's because their bosses wouldn't like it, or their members of their family, or members of their wider community, or religion, or whatever. And it's a hugely powerful thing to say, to give everybody access to the same kind of opportunity for a richer life experience that technology can give those of us who are quite happy to stand up and put our name to everything we say, kind of take for granted. And I'll echo my colleague's speech about how privileged we all are on this panel. But as we saw with the tweets to Caroline Criado Perez, for example, and many millions of examples like that. It can be very dangerous. I think it's quite right if somebody sends a tweet of that nature, which is a criminal offence, that their anonymity is broken and the police go and knock on their door. So I don't think it's a straightforward thing there. I think the important thing is that the opportunity is there for people who need it as an enriching experience, but not that it is used as a cover for criminality. And that means there does have to be a way to break that anonymity. Now, I'm fully aware that people who know what they're doing can defeat that kind of thing, but I'm glad to say I'm not aware of people who that good at knowing what they're doing have wanted to send death threats to random journalists. And when that happens, I'm sure we'll have this debate again in spades.
Okay.
I think there's a role for both anonymity and also being able to identify yourself. I mean, identity is going to be increasingly important because of reputation, and people will become to acknowledge more and more based on their reputation. But anonymity is also important, and perhaps the answer there is to actually provide services whereby you can literally ignore any anonymous sort of emails, tweets, or whatever. Maybe the answer there is actually simply to sort of like block any anonymous comments or information sort of like that you don't want to see because you don't know what its provenance. Just simply say, I'm not interested in that. Or anybody, or simply say, anybody with a reputation lower than this, I don't want to know. So I think that's a more appropriate use. Anonymity is important, and so is identity and reputation. So that's how I'd look at it.
Okay. Andrew Cooper.
I've used online anonymity on one occasion, and that was Greg Barker, who's was the Conservative, who is still the Conservative Minister for Energy and Climate Change. He said that those people who oppose government policy on cutting feed-in tariffs for solar panels are the environmental Taliban, and he was referring to Friends of the Earth and the Renewable Energy Association and sort of very, people who consider themselves to be fairly sensible organisations. So I set up a Twitter account called Environmental Taliban, and I started sending tweets out about the infidel Greg Barker and how what would happen to him if he continued to behave in this way.
Is this a scoop? Are you already on record?
I'm on record now. It was me, Governor. You've got me bang to rights. So I set up this account called Environmental Taliban, and for a brief period of time, it had quite it had a certain amount of amusing activity which went with it. I think I would have to delete this account now, aren't I? Okay, so yeah, there is a use for it, and I do note on the charter it doesn't say that you have a right. Everybody has a fundamental right to anonymity or anything like that. It doesn't say that. It says that you will promote online anonymity and encryption, which means it has a role. That it's an important thing. It is a tool that you can use, and it's something that can be there as part of the internet, and that we can use. So yes, no problem with that in supporting that. But likewise, there are occasions when anonymity is perhaps not something that is a blanket approach that, it can, like you say, it can be used for good or ill.
Yeah. Fantastic. I was going to be rounding up, but I'd really like to make sure that there aren't any further questions that people have got that they'd like to ask the panel before I do that. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask? About web filtering.
In the UK, we've asked all the ISPs, government asked all the ISPs to filter the internet so that when you're going to the internet, certain sites are blocked. What does that mean for companies in the EU and different member states who have their sites blocked by the wrong technology introduced by different member states? What redress do those companies have to get their sites unblocked? Should we have EU legislation to limit how limited effect blocking? And also, countries like Turkey who want to join the EU and want to censor the internet massively for political reasons. Is that censorship? Practical censorship of the EU? I suppose I'm saying what is your view on EU legislation for
Right, I'm going to use personal experience. I told you that I lived in Belgium for a while because I was working in the European Parliament. I was amazed to discover that online betting sites in Belgium are illegal. And when you try to go on to an online betting site, it's bizarre. You get a big red hand. It's very much a Big Brother thing, almost George Orwellian, really. A big hand says in 4 different languages, because Belgium is a trilingual state, and English for the foreigners there, that the Belgian court has decided, and it gives the reference to the law, that this isn't appropriate for citizens, blah, 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 and thus you cannot access your betting site, even as a British citizen, an EU citizen no less, working in the EU bubble, wanting to access an EU and a British site. Now, I thought this was rather inconvenient, because I fancied putting £10 on Liverpool to win a game once upon a time. But I also recognised that the majority of the Belgian population had voted in a government that felt online betting provided no social value, that no value was really created in allowing people like me to lose £10, as it was, or even to gain money if I won. And although I thought it was inconvenient, I'd chosen to live in Belgium. I think that that's right. Now, if I disagree with such a policy, I think I should stand up, as we said, on Speaker's Corner or on events like this and say, this is right or this is wrong, because, and try and convince people to come with me. Or, to do it at a slightly bigger level, to make a website explaining why I think that's right or wrong, and to make the case for it. Now, so do I think then that there should be a European role? No, I don't. I think that the people of Portugal and Poland or Britain and Bulgaria are fundamentally very different people. They have common things that we can all share, respect for human rights and so on. But we all want a clean environment, Andrew, we all want a stronger economy, but fundamental social choices belong at the national level. Now, your second question was about internet censorship and Turkey. Should the Turkish government be able to censor the internet? That famous episode a couple of months ago where they closed down Twitter, only to see the Turkish president using what was the service called? I forget now.
I think he was
He got arrested for it, didn't he?
Yeah. But to make the point that Twitter shouldn't be censored, I think there should be a basic political statement that political censorship in Europe is wrong. Anybody who aspires to join the EU must respect freedom of expression. So, on a business level, on a social policy level, those decisions should be made at the member state. On a fundamental human rights perspective, there should be a European minimum, and there is.
So, governments shouldn't be blocking sites, but UK politicians are okay to encourage ISPs to introduce filters across the board?
No, electorates, I think. If electorates decide something like online gambling is wrong, or more extreme forms of pornography are wrong, then electorates have the right to limit that, I think. But that's my opinion. There is, I hope, political disagreement here, because this is the essence of politics.
Okay. Any further thoughts on that? On
Yeah,
censorship
well,
and web filtering?
more on the issue. More on the issue itself. I mean, we had a debate at our party conference last September on web filtering, and no, I think we had a proposal from Baroness Fluella Benjamin, saying
Play School.
from Play School, yes, who is now a Liberal Democrat member of the House of Lords, saying, "Isn't it terrible what children are exposed to? We must put blocks on all the internet connections." And there was actually a very powerful debate, which her position was defeated, where we rejected all that. We said, let's go away and look at this thing more carefully. And we had speaker after speaker saying, well, I was a teenager and I was gay and I wanted to, and I found other people like me through this, and it would have been blocked had there been blocks in. And I couldn't talk to my parents because they were, I couldn't talk to my church or whatever. Example after example, sexual health information site would be blocked. There was a debate in Parliament some years ago now, probably 10 years ago, about sexual offences, and emails coming in from constituents about lobbying their MPs to how to vote on this were all being filtered out by the Parliament's filters. The technology is not ready for this. It's not good enough, and there is a very big danger it will do a lot more harm than good. So, that was our party's position, and we rejected that policy. I understand David Cameron's position, and I think he's probably planning to do that now in the next Parliament if he has a majority. I think that there's likely to be resistance on that from Liberal Democrats. That's not to say it's a black and white issue, because it isn't. But as it stands, I think we need to be very cautious and not go steaming ahead on this. I tend to agree that it's not particularly a European issue. I think my colleague Michael here is right about political expression. It's amazing how many categories get added, isn't it? When you look at the web filters, it's not just terrorism, it's not just child pornography. You go down the list, political stuff it gets blocked. Stuff about religion gets blocked. I think, why on earth? It's not appropriate for children. Some things are not appropriate for adults, and children need to see them. So, yeah.
Okay.
Filters don't work. Simple as that. I mean, I've been on sites where they're using web filters. I'm looking to buy a tent and blocked weapons. Weapons? I don't know. Tent pegs? Nice. I don't know. I have no idea what it is.
Hamlet is the
I mean, a programming weblog, I remember that being blocked actually. It's called Lambda the Ultimate. And I actually queried that one. I thought, because it's named after a famous programming paper. And I thought, why was that blocked? And apparently Lambda, the Greek letter Lambda, which is in this case is based on lambda calculus, is an international symbol amongst homosexuals. And I'm going, right, okay, so why is it blocked? This is the kind of stupidity you have with any kind of web filtering. And I think as a general rule, no web filtering at all. If a site is actually illegal, say for example, because we had the issue earlier with child pornography, if a site is actually providing something which is actually illegal, go after it properly. But as a general rule, all internet sites should be unfiltered and available to all.
Okay, Andrew Cooper.
I go along with that in terms of if something's illegal, it's illegal. If you're employing a filter, that's an expression of morality, isn't it? And if politicians are somehow the arbiters of what is or isn't moral, then you're making a huge error in that way. Get the law right. Make sure the law is doing what the law's supposed to do. If somebody's breaking the law, then deal with it. If you're putting a filter on, in many ways, in terms of liberty and all those sort of issues, it's exactly the same approach as what China are doing in the things that in the way that they're approaching this. I agree, filters don't work. Let's get the law right.
Okay. Excellent. Any further comments or questions? I think you had a question earlier on, if I'm right. Yeah. Okay.
Just going back to the previous topic on transparency, on lawmaking.
Okay.
How adequate are the freedom of information provisions for EC legislation process? And what would you do to raise awareness of it or to improve the process within the Commission?
Okay. Good question.
I didn't get all that question. Could you?
So, how adequate are freedom of information provisions for the European Union? Is that correct? Yeah.
And what would you do to improve awareness of them and effectiveness of the process?
Good. Okay. And how would you improve effectiveness of them and awareness of them? Michael Naughton?
I think they're getting there. I think this is one very strong argument for British continued membership of the EU. We're ahead of the game here in things like access to documents, access to minutes of meetings, observation of the legislative process. I worked until this campaign in the public sector, and I was quite surprised by the level of openness that we have in the national context. Europe is a little further behind, but is being pulled along by British leadership. I think it's wonderful, finally, that we are, and that Andrew and I are agreeing on this, that we are pulling 27 other countries with us. It's a good example of Britain making things better, of Britain providing strong data protection leadership in this case. How long will it take to get there? Well, we do have to convince certain countries that openness is a good thing. Not all countries are quite on the same page on this, especially countries which have more recently emerged from communism. Poland in particular has been very reluctant to follow our lead. But again, with anything in Europe, we are trying to find a compromise between 28 different national cultures. And I think we will get there slowly, we will then get there eventually, and I think we're going about as quickly as we can. Well, the Commission itself is subject to EU law, and EU law is made by the 28 countries. So we can't do anything on the Commission specifically until we can convince 28 ministers sitting in the Council and the representatives of 28 countries sitting in the Parliament. So it's the European argument that we need to win, not something specifically focused on the Commission per se.
Okay. Any further?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I guess, I think the UK is leading on this. As there's no Labour representative here, I'll say that Tony Blair was the man who introduced the Freedom of Information Act, which has been the bane of many Labour councils since then. So I don't think many Labour Party people have backed him. I suppose the question is what would you do in terms of freedom of information? I think obviously there's the way that you behave as a member of the European Parliament. You can very much, obviously the issues about the Commission are there, but what you can do as a member of the European Parliament is say, this is my approach to freedom of information about the things that I deal with, using yourself as a conduit to be able to get information to people, to try and do that using the parliamentary role that you have. So I think those things are important. I think the EU does have a lot to learn from the UK. Some of it good, some of it bad actually in terms of freedom of information requests, because looking at a practical level in terms of councils, there have been a lot of freedom of information requests out there that have been carried out where political leaders have actually manipulated information which has gone out to make it look better for themselves. So, how freedom of information requests are handled and dealt with is also important to make sure that the nuancing of the information that's provided is limited.